Thank you for joining DirectWomen's Power Chat with Pamela L. Carter. My name is Kelsey Velma, and I'll be your technical moderator behind the scenes. I am the Director of Programs and Operations here at DirectWomen, and I'm excited to be hosting this session. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping notes. You all should be able to see the screen right now and hear my voice. The phone lines, however, are muted, so although all of you can hear me, we cannot hear you. That said, you can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. At the top right of your screen is the GoToWebinar panel. Just open the console, find the questions section, type your question, and hit submit. Feel free to submit questions at any time. Today's webinar will be approximately 45 minutes in length, with 30 minutes of content followed by a few minutes for Q&A. Lastly, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you will complete. It is only 4 questions and should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes tops. With that, I would like to turn it over to the moderator of today's program, Bobby Liebenberg. Bobby?
Thanks, Kelsey, and good afternoon, and thank you for joining this Power Chat today with Pamela Carter. I'm Bobby Liebenberg, and I will have the honor of speaking with Pamela today. I'm a senior partner at Fine Kaplan & Black in Philadelphia, where I concentrate my practice in complex commercial litigation and antitrust class actions representing both plaintiffs and defendants. I'm also a principal in the Red D Group, a women-owned consulting group which advises law firms, corporations, and organizations as to how to achieve their goals for innovation, growth, organizational excellence with a focus on DEI using database tools and assessments. I had the honor of being one of the co-founders of DirectWomen. I served as its chair for 5 years and now serve on its advisory board. DirectWomen is the only national organization whose mission is to increase the representation of women attorneys on corporate boards. For over a decade, we have worked to identify highly qualified women attorneys and help them to position themselves for service on the boards of major companies. We also serve as a resource for companies seeking experienced women board candidates. As Pam and I will discuss during this interview, she has been a trailblazer during her career and serves on several boards. In fact, because of her distinguished board service, in 2018, DirectWomen honored her with its Sandra Day O'Connor Board Excellence Award. So without further ado, welcome, Pam. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to speak with you. And I encourage everyone to read Pam's amazing bio. But you have shattered gender and racial barriers in private practice, government, business, and corporate boardrooms. You were the first African-American woman to be elected as a state attorney general anywhere in the country, and the first woman and first African-American to be elected as the Indiana Attorney General. So describe for us the life experiences that led you to pursue these leadership roles.
Well, first, Bobby, it's an honor to be talking with you during this chat. We met when I did receive the award, and I wanted to let everybody know what a fan I am of yours. For you are a trailblazer, and the reason that I'm here is to support DirectWomen, which I know has done a great job of heightening the awareness of lawyers and boards and corporations so that our voices are making the kinds of contributions that we need to be making. So thank you for everything you've done. And in terms of my life, it's been a great life. It's not been an easy one. And I started with joy and excitement, I'd say, because the environment that I grew up in was segregated in the Indianapolis area. My parents are college educated. They are visionaries and are willing to take risk. And so I grew up in that kind of an environment. And when I was about 5, my dad built our home. And he built it along with about 140 other African-American families. And it was an experiment in Indianapolis, where at the time they were going to build and did build a project, for African-Americans. That's where everyone was going to live, irrespective of your income, education, work capability, it didn't matter. We were kind of colonizing African Americans during that period of time. And my mother and father refused to go there. They said, well, it's brand new, and they were really pushing hard on that. And so instead they had an apartment that they were superintendents of, and they met this African American visionary, a social worker, and a lawyer who had bought this land and were going to have a subdivision, because at the time, no African American could receive a mortgage from any bank in Indiana. We had two people that owned homes in Indianapolis at the time. One was a doctor, one was a dentist, and they had to get their mortgage from North Carolina, which was an African American insurance company. And so this was a big experiment. People were very nervous, and they were saying, well, you know, they all had to have jobs, which of course they did. They had to either have a college degree or were trade unionists and skilled builders. And they had them. I mean, it was easy. We had the pool of availability, and 140 men built their homes, and they paired it with the Amish and the Quakers, who were conscientious objectors. And so this was the conscientious objector project. So they came and they had the building skills, and the down payment was the sweat equity to build the homes with the conscientious objectors. And that's where I grew up for a lot of my early years. And I watched my dad, and I watched this community being built. And that's the community I was raised in. So, and then my family were Catholic, and my grandfather became Catholic because he was a painter, and he would go all around. It was the only church within Canada, and he painted churches and basilicas. And so that was the only church that would continuously allow him to come in. And so that's how we became, on one side, the Catholic. And on the other side, my grandfather studied law and was never able to practice because of the color of his skin. So he became a minister. So you can see this kind of churning of opportunity all toward the American dream. And so that's the environment I grew up in, both oppressive, because I couldn't go to a number of places in, like the amusement parks, couldn't go there. There were a lot of places, swimming pools were not allowed, and I knew this, and we knew it. And a lot of the sports teams, they would overtly, they, meaning whomever we were playing, we would win in track or in basketball, but they wouldn't allow us to win. So I saw, you know, racism up close and personal, but I also saw extraordinary neighborhoods and friendships and relationships that were built in our community, both at our parish, which was all Black, and in our 140 home community subdivision. So I grew up in this kind of a bifurcated environment where I saw with reality what was going on, and then I would watch our people being depicted in ways that were inconsistent with who they were. So I didn't pay much attention, and it didn't have the kind of influence in terms of self-fulfilling prophecy. I say all of that as an introduction because I grew up in a loving and can-do environment where there was lots of other awareness, lots of sharing and caring. And I remember watching the George Floyd parts of the trial where you saw the humanity and the empathy and the deep feelings. That evoked the same kind of experience I had in my neighborhood. But so it gave me the esteem and the other awareness and the can-do spirit, irrespective of what was going on outside of our neighborhood or school, to just get on with it. Get your education, fight for your, you know, yourself, your family, the community. And that's how that was the first series of stepping stones.
Pamela, thank you so much for sharing. It's really an inspiring story. And I know you also had a childhood meeting with Dr. Martin Luther King. And did that influence you in terms of pursuing a career of public service as well as sort of this biographical, you know, your childhood and early adult experiences?
Absolutely. Dr. King was marching in Chicago. And that was the time, the only time before he was assassinated that he actually was injured and was hit by a brick. And since Chicago's not far from, you know, Indiana and Illinois, we went to that march. And I remember being there and seeing people in trees with guns, and the Ku Klux Klan were lining the streets on either side. And I remember the Ku Klux Klan costumes, or what they wore, was satin, and it was made with such care, and it was such a symbol of hate. And yet it was made, it was a beautiful garment. And then you saw all of these hate groups, and then you saw the phalanx of police and other law enforcement, and I couldn't tell whether they were protecting them or us. And they had horrible placards all along, and we started marching. And as soon as we started marching, people started throwing rocks, and that was the first time I'd ever experienced that kind of primal fear where the hair on the back of your neck actually stands up. But I remember also, and then we started to link arms, and I understand why people link arms, and they sing because it helps to reduce the fear and anxiety. It keeps you focused. And we began singing "We Shall Overcome." The pace picked up, and at some point I remember transcending the fear and figuring out, I was in high school. I said, this is my country. I have multiple generations that have given their blood, sweat, and tears here. I'm not about to be turned away. And we marched, and while they were throwing the rocks, Martin Luther King was hit, and he actually went down and came up. He said that was the only time that he had actually been harmed, and he said he had not experienced such hostility. And we say up north as down south, but they call it up south because there was actually as much going on in the north as it was in the south. It just wasn't reflected in the news. And so it inspired me to be something and to fight for people. And so that's always been a common theme. It's not inconsistent with who the people around me were doing anyway, but it was very inspirational.
Clearly you took that passion when you became elected as Indiana Attorney General and were able to really be in power, to have a real seat at the table. So it is amazing to see that how much resilience and grit really fueled you. So we do definitely thank you for your public service. And after serving as an Indiana Attorney General, you became the Vice President, GC, and Corporate Secretary of Cummins Inc., a manufacturer and marketer of diesel engines, related components, and power systems. You then chose to move to the business side of Cummins and eventually became the president of Cummins Filtration and Cummins Distribution, and were the first woman to run one of the business units at Cummins. So I think clearly you've described that you've always had a real appetite for risk, but why did you decide to move to the business side instead of staying in your role as GC?
Well, I liked business. My dad was a businessman, and I also wanted to get into international trade, and I wanted to live and work around the world. And this was a great opportunity, and I couldn't do that as effectively unless I was running a business. And so, but I had actually, before I had become the general counsel, I was in a law firm for a little bit of period of time, and Cummins was my client. And they had wanted me to come into the corporation as the GC because at that time, the Department of Justice and the EPA were coming after all diesel engine manufacturers for emissions issues. And they needed somebody that really worked closely with the Department of Justice, which I had, and had done the large, scale class action litigation, et cetera. And I didn't actually, I was very happy being a lawyer. And they said, but if you do come in, then we can help you to develop your career. And so I thought, okay. And so we did, and we reached the consent decree, and Cummins did a very, very good job of, and actually we had to innovate in order to reach these emissions requirements. And in turn, after I did that, I asked whether I could get on the business side so I could make an impact, because I also thought I could make a bigger impact. And they said, sure. I said, but overseas, because I really wanted my family to have an expatriate experience. And so we did. We went over and I ran Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and everything, from research, design, manufacturing, sales, marketing, finance, law, everything. And so we really did then position me to be eligible for a number of roles. And so after I did that and we had a great time, I came back and they assigned me to become the president of filtration here in Tennessee. That's how I got here to Tennessee. And we fell in love with the state at the time, and so we haven't left. Though I didn't, and then I became head of and president of the distribution business, both of which are, in 190 countries or 155 countries. And so, we traveled the world, and that sense of adventure has always been a part of us as well. So we had it all, and it was fantastic. I learned a lot.
So what advice do you have for women who may be sort of risk averse, who may be worried about taking that stretch assignment, or going into an area of business that they aren't familiar with? We know that women, unfortunately, really experience this imposter syndrome, where they believe they're going to be exposed as a fraud, and that they attribute their success to luck rather than to their skill, their experience, and their talents. And in fact, a 2020 KPMG survey found that 75% of women in corporate America have experienced imposter fraud syndrome. So what is your advice? Like, what do we have to do to overcome this? Because you're a great example.
I mean, I think we should always look at risk, but risk should not be the North Star. And a North Star for women tends to be, we have to be ready for the role. Obviously, I wasn't even ready for the GC role. I would say the law part I could handle, but diesel engine, I'm not an engineer. And I had to defend a diesel engine, so I had to get to know it. And so I learned. And so the chief technical officer, who was a brilliant gentleman, taught me the engine fast enough so I learned to disassemble, put it together, and then I had to defend it. And it's the same with business. Okay, so if you weren't a plant manager, go talk to a plant manager, figure it out. I went over to Toyota and I said, I want to go through your training, figure it out. Most lawyers are smart. Most lawyers have a lot of facts, and they have to distill all that and place it in a framework that actually works. It's no different with life. And so if you think about it through the framework of how you practice law, then do that with your own life and practice your life by just taking one step at a time. You don't memorize all the laws, but when you get a new case, you figure it out. And that's what we have to do, and not be fearful, because at the other end of that's how you learn. And then you learn iteratively, and then you can learn how to avoid certain kinds of risk. And it doesn't mean you're not going to have them, because you will, but you're going to have way more opportunities. And then you also, I think, have to realize how to be effective in terms of your relationships with people. What works and what doesn't, and just study. Watch what kind of people that are authentic and have real values still succeed. What do they do when they're engaging with other people? But just get on with it. I would say I would never have a risk per se be the North Star for making the decision for what I wanted to do next.
Great advice, and clearly we can see the qualities as to why so many boards have asked you to sit on their company's boards. And you do serve on the boards of several public companies, including Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, an IT and technology company, Enbridge, the largest oil and gas pipeline company in North America, Broadridge Financial Solutions, a financial technology and communication servicing company, and you previously served on the boards of CSX, a freight and intermodal rail transportation company, and Meyer, a privately held supercenter chain company. And I think you were a GC when you went on your first board, which was Meyer. Yes. And what steps did you take to get on that first board? Did they come to you? Did you go to them? How did it happen?
They came to me because they were looking for a lawyer, and I was born in Michigan, and I was educated in Michigan as well. So I have Michigan contacts, and my husband's from there and his family. And word spread that I had left office, and I hadn't yet gone to Cummins, and they reached out to me. And I said, we need a lawyer. And since you're a former attorney general, so that one was, I would say, is luck. And I tend to have some of the imposter syndrome. I'm always surprised. I don't want to act, like, how did you even know that I exist, kind of thing. So, and you will see that's a theme as well. I'm not particularly ambitious toward a goal. I just want to do the really best that I can. So the Meyer family reached out to me, and I thought, well, that's intriguing. I knew nothing about boards. nothing. And I would also say that most of the roles that I have held or board seats that I enjoy, I didn't even know existed. So there was no plan or career, advice that I had been given. I served on that board, and it taught me so much. And I still am very close friends with the Meyer family, and they're a lovely Grand Rapids family, and it's a great business. And so I learned a lot about retailing, and stayed on it for quite a while.
And was there any pushback at Cummins when you served on the board of Meyer? Did they discourage that? Were they okay with it?
Well, the fact I came while I was already on the board, so my entry to Cummins was with me being on a board, and so they always tolerated that. Yeah, so I always had at least one board while I was within Cummins.
So it's interesting that they, in particular, were looking for the types of skills that lawyers can bring to a board, not to replace their general counsel or their legal advisors, but the absolute right skills that lawyers have in terms of strategic and creative brainstorming and how to solve through problems. And that's something we tried to emphasize at DirectWomen in terms of the value proposition that our women alumni can bring to the boards of companies. So once you get on one board, it seems like it may be easier to get on other boards. So how do you go about deciding what additional boards you want to go into? Do you look for a company that are related industry-wise to other boards that you're serving on, boards whose missions resonate with you? What goes into that deliberative process?
First is the values, whether or not they share the same values that I have, the integrity and how they treat their customers and their employees and the community. And then my initial boards were all similar. They were industrial, which I knew, and I knew well. And we actually serve some of these customers, oil and gas, with our, because there are a lot of these equipment. The equipment is powered by our engines, whether it's in rail or it's in oil and gas. So that was a little easier because it's a smaller community of networks. And they knew that I was an executive at that point too. And so I had moved from the law, and I had P&L responsibility. And so it was sufficient leap of faith that they could take with me, because they knew, and these were heavily regulated industries as well. So the legal exposure that I had both as a public official and as a lawyer is good. And that's an important value proposition, because most companies are regulated, and that's going to increase, not decrease. And in the technology sphere, you're getting ready to see a lot of that as well. And then related industries, because you do similar things, and so that was an easier move. And then once that happens, then your name just gets kicked around. And unfortunately, when I was in the 90s, I mean, there just weren't that many women, let alone African Americans.
Right.
So your name was, it was a little easier not to be on the boards or to serve, because you still run all of the challenges that women and people of color run, but at least there's visibility.
And can you speak a little bit, because I know you described to me what the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Board is doing to develop and position senior executive for board's position, because I think it's a really innovative program that they've embarked on.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. And our general, and the woman who's in the law department, I think she's our assistant general counsel, was just put on the board as well. So it's called the Ready Now Initiative, and the women on the board, and I have to say that we have a great number of women on it. It was 40 or 50%, because people come and go. And Meg Whitman, she actually really had, I think, the most diverse board that certainly I've served on, and I certainly would think it's in the first quartile of any board. And so what we did was we created a committee, and we identified the top talent of women executives, and then those who could be executives that were ready for boards. So we call it Ready Now. And we actually went through a training series. And then in addition to that, we mentored them. And so my mentee, in fact, she just got on a board yesterday. So we were really excited about it. She, we go through the process of talking about the interview process. And remember, you were talking about the imposter syndrome. If you're on a board, you're the boss. You know, the board is the overseer of the company. If you're working in the company, you often see the chairman, the CEO as the boss. He is your direct, boss, or indirect the boss. But it's the board of directors. And so you have to change your mindset to recognize the fact that you're the boss. You can hire and fire the CEO, and that's part of your job.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you're overseeing the strategy and the governance and of that company. And you really need to know all of that. So you have to act like that when you're interviewing. So if you're interviewing with the CEO, you're not going to be supplicant. I'm not saying you have to be a jerk either, but you're his peer, or when it comes to hiring and firing, you're his boss or her boss. And so that whole mindset change. And so then the questions and answer process transforms, because when that person is then asking you questions, or even if there are other interviewers, you have to understand your role. And so we really went through a lot of, it's sort of like a moot court process where you actually go through that, and you'll find that women will trip up very quickly and subordinate. When they, and you're thinking, well, this person, they're not going to be able to fire me. They're not going to be able to challenge me. And so you've got to be in that mindset and you develop it to understand that that's your role, and guide me and support me if you're the CEO or other executives that you're going to be working with. And so that's one thing. And I think the other thing is if you're in the law and you haven't had a lot of exposure to the business realm, I like the training that DirectWomen provides, because you do need to know the language of business. I mean, they have to have a reason. To your point about value proposition, what is your value proposition? I will say that most women lawyers actually have it. The question is, how do you mine it? And then have the confidence to say that this particular corporation needs it, because there are always different problems that are going to need to be solved, and there's problem solvers on the other side, and we are problem solvers.
I think this is such great advice, and something we really emphasize in DirectWomen in terms of having this board-ready mindset, that you have the confidence to know that you do have values and skills you can bring to a board, and that you also can succinctly, in the board interview and in the board process, express what those values are going to be if you get selected to go on the board. So this is great advice, and I hope everyone listening are taking notes on this. In terms of the mentor-mentee, which I think is really important, do you advise women who are looking to get on a board to try and establish some kind of mentor relationship of people who can introduce you in terms of possible board positions?
Yes, but I would say that I would challenge those who are managing partners in law firms. If you're CEO or if you're the GC, if you're in a position of power, that person, even if you're not the one seeking a board seat, should set up some process to ensure that the women in your group are trained and supported, and it becomes a part of the work plan. And that when you're doing performance management, it's not just for this role or a promotional role, but eventually a board seat, so that you're really grooming people way early in their career. That there are board opportunities, and what does that mean? And then that we're going to support you in that whole process, because we see that you have that kind of capability. And then, because I think what happens is that we don't have the network of support to identify within the areas that women work. And so that becomes, so you're kind of going up a hill, alone. And yes, you can make it that way, but I would always push the firm or the corporation, that's their job, to identify these women and then train and develop them rigorously, and then be proactive in reaching out to corporations. That's what we do. And so we said, okay, I know X, Y, and Z, and I network all the time for women and for people of color. And if there's a talented person that's male, or that's fine too, if I know what they mean. But I am actively doing that because it's a commitment of mine. But I really urge the place where people work, they have to step up and network proactively for women and for
And I
women
think,
lawyers.
yeah, it's really important because we know that 75% of board seats come through network contacts.
Yes.
So, you know, really investing in your network and really trying to maximize your network contacts is essential if you want to get on a board.
Yes. And in many places where I have spoken, I will say most women, you know, it'll be, I was at a compensation, I'm a chair of a compensation committee on one of my boards, and I was at a convention and I was speaking and I was saying to the women, I said, has anybody ever talked to you in your corporations? Because we're all corporations, about being on a board? No, 100%. I said, well, that's the first thing. In your work plan, your bosses, and many of them were there, CEOs, that's their job too. You know, and so that's the part about the community. We have to insist upon these complex organizations fighting on our behalf, you know, so that we're not these lone pioneers. Yeah, you're going to find them, but they're not going to be as strong either if they don't have a phalanx of women who are there to help and support. So it's both. And so to go back to the individual, what do they do? Yes, I mean, you have to be proactive. If you know that you want to go on to boards, I would say three things. One is that you do need to find a mentor. And DirectWomen, you know, if they're listening here, if it's the people that are listening to this, then they can ask. You provide that. And if they don't know, then there's lots of associations. You know, if you're an in-house counsel, I don't know all the audience, well, then there's the Women's Corporate Directors Group. There's enough associations that are out here that are very advocacy oriented and do a lot of training and development, and they have deep networks. So yes, you know, do that. And then the other thing is to understand that you can and you ought to think about being on a board because we desperately need those voices.
I mean, it's always surprising to me that people, you know, will say, I want to get on a board, and I will ask, have you told your CEO? Have you told your manager? Have you told anyone that you're interested in this, in board service? So I think that's really good advice. Is you also have to let people know that what you want and how they can help you.
You know, I was thinking about that because I don't know that I would have known. I wouldn't have thought about it. I had two bites at the apple that I was lucky actually for that. One, the Meyer, because they reached out, and then at Cummins, being this corporate secretary, I had to work with the board. And I thought, oh, okay, I got it before, but I really understood it then. So part of it is also exposing young women early, you know, so that when you first come out of law school and you have all of these CLE courses and they talk about all of the areas of the law of specialization, part of it ought to be board service. I think we also introduce the reality that women can serve in this capacity, that capacity, and board capacity. So I don't think we know enough about the opportunities either.
And the importance of, you know, of boards in terms of, we know from research that where there is, you know, 3 or more women on a corporate board, there actually is this domino effect where there are more women in senior roles, there's better compensation. So it is really an important place to be in terms of effectuating change by being on the board.
No question. I remember when I was the only woman and the only person of color on a board, it's fundamentally different than being on a board with several women. And it's so much, you know, it's absolutely more comfortable. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that the others were uncomfortable, but it's just better. And the conversations are better. I think the risk appetite is greater with women. The willingness to look around the corner and to ask the tough questions, not be quick to conform. So there's a lot that I see every single day, that the value of the women in general, just our gender and the way in which we've been brought to the board seat matters.
I mean, you talked a little bit about the board interview process. Are there some questions that are good ones that board candidates should think about asking? Should they be looking at the skills matrix if the company has one, in terms of framing their value proposition as, you need this skill if it's regulatory and I can provide this? What advice do you have?
I would say be very, very well prepared. You know, read the annual reports and your proxy statements, any of the submissions, to get a real sense of who they are and where are they along the spectrum in terms of, for me, values are very important, and how they walk the talk of their values. Do you see the values being reflected in their products, in their people, in their decision making, in the way in which they engage with the community? And I would ask those questions, at the end of the day. It's funny too that this is something that I've come to late recently. How you approach the conversation is important. I've heard it a lot. They say that I approach it often humbly. That's the thing that the CEO has said to me when I've done that. I don't know that I actually did, but I'm always more interested in what they're doing, and I'm happy to engage with them. But I'm interested immediately when I go in the room. How are you doing? How did you get to your role? Who are you? And in a very intriguing process, I think that works, and it's not being inauthentic. I actually am quite interested. And so if it's more mechanical and you go through and recite your resume, probably not effective. But if you're already engaging and you really want to know more about the business, and you really want to know more about that person who's running this business and what's it like, and what are the biggest risks, and what are the things that you're most proud of, then you're already in the mix. And I think that is so you have to be prepared before you can ask those questions. And then I think once they see the excitement about that business, that's really important. I interviewed 3 women, all lawyers, not this week.
Yay.
And it was interesting because some talked about they were more resume reciters. And that's okay, but I've already read your resume.
Right.
What I want to know is, how does that resume relate? And then how do you relate? How do you do that? And then there were others who were, were not resume. They were relating to the business. Oh, I've engaged with this business for a long time. I actually know a number of people that are there, and I really respect their values. I mean, boom, right in it. So it's a very different, you're not interviewing for a job. You're interviewing to run a company in partnership with your colleagues.
And it's a really different mindset, as we just talked about. And I think that's true, being authentic and being passionate about why is it that you want to join this board? How does it resonate with your values? Because if it does, I think you will show that passion in the interview.
Yes, in fact, one of the people said at an interview, I remember the fact that this company is always so well trusted by the regulators, that they walk their talk. That is really important because they knew it, they expressed it, and they were proud of it, and they wanted to be a part of it. That's a very different conversation than what people might think of in terms of a classic interview.
Excellent. I do want to, given your background and your mention of the George Floyd murder, that, there really has been this re-emphasis on the importance of social and racial justice issues. Are you seeing boards really looking for women and men of color to come on the board? Are you seeing this more of an emphasis with companies?
Absolutely. I mean, transformative change I've seen in very short periods of time at the highest levels of corporations. I mean, they're taking it very seriously. They're listening to their employees. They are saddened at being very proactive, very authentic, and also with the recent series of horrible attacks against the Asian American community.
Yeah.
New listening sessions, engagement with the boards, lots of proactive hiring at the highest levels. You bet. It's been very transformative. And the boards are saying in the area, in instances where it isn't, they're not letting the senior staff or executive staff off the hook.
Have you seen some characteristics of some successful DEI board initiatives? Are you seeing, as you're talking about more emphasis on this, boards taking the steps on DEI and really making this a priority for their companies?
Yes, I think the ones that are most effective, they have the councils, and they call them different resource groups or affinity groups, but listening to them and actually implementing the suggestions that people have, the listening tours that people are doing, because they do need to listen and not just dictate. They need to hear. I mean, think about it. You have a person at a board meeting, you have a diverse staff. They all come in, you start a meeting, but they don't all start at the same point. There might be an African-American man that had been stopped by the police and harassed before he got there. There might be an African-American woman who've been not accepted at an emergency room. These are actual cases. And what we do in one of our companies is we always start the meeting with head, heart, and hand. So we always know exactly how everybody is right now, real time. How are you? What are you thinking?
Head, heart, and what? Head, heart, and
head, heart, and hand. The head is what you're thinking right now. How are you feeling right now? And are you ready to work with your hands? And say, I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking that I'm not focused on this work because I was just harassed. My heart is broken because I just lost a person to COVID. I'm here, but I'm not here. When you go around the room, it creates other awareness. It insists upon a level of empathy. You see each other much more personally. And then you get to work. And we did that every single day. This was at Cummins. And it was a great practice. We always did it. And over time, you do it more rapidly, but we always began. So we just knew where people were. And then you could follow up with that person over time, and it just makes you better. And so that same phenomenon of that same practice, if you did it with DEI, how do you feel when you come in? Because you're going to be experiencing something very different. And people should, just knowing that, and then working together on intense projects for the good of a company where you're thrown together is really another good way. But I think, but at the end of the day, you gotta just hire more people. Don't tell me that you can't find any. Go look for them. They're here.
Right.
And particularly in the law, give me a break. We've got plenty of lawyers. And we have plenty of lawyers of every race, creed, and color. So
that's absolutely right. Well, we have a couple of questions, but before we get to them, I do, just based on everything that you've experienced and just what we've talked about today, what would be the best tip you would give to our listeners with respect to searching for a board position?
I would say go for it. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Do not let a barrier be your North Star. You have the ability to do it, and reach out, to all of us. We're happy to help. At the end of the day, that's what we're here for. And go for it. You can.
But that's what we say at DirectWomen, that looking for a board position is a marathon, not a sprint. Be patient and don't get discouraged. So Kelsey,
Yes.
I don't know if you're going to come on to ask some of the questions.
Yes, thanks so much, Bobby. And thank you, Pam, for all that you've shared. We do have a couple of audience questions, so we'll try to move through them pretty quickly here. Our first question was, what has been one of your most challenging experiences on a board, and what did you learn from that experience?
I was on one of my early boards, and I had to make the decision along with other board members about whether to remain open or to shut down the business. And so it was very controversial, lots of emotion. I was relatively new, and they asked me first. And I knew that the people that had brought me to the board were on a different page than I. And so I told the truth. I was authentic, and I made my decision, and it was very challenging. And what I learned from that is, if you are authentic, and that was a risk, I could have been thrown off and also hated by the whole community. I didn't realize until 5 years later when the person said to me, you don't realize that you actually helped save this business. And I didn't. I was just answering a question. I was being a board member, relatively new, I was trying to do the right thing, but it was an unpopular thing. And that's happened to me a couple of times on different boards where they came to me first. And it was very challenging. And I remember, but I took the risk. I took the road less traveled. and I survived to tell the story.
Great. Our next question is, it sounds like this person is currently serving on a nonprofit board, and they're looking for any suggestions you might have in transitioning to a corporate board.
Nonprofit board service is really good service. It's great experience, and many of them are populated by members of the corporate community. And so if you have any people from corporate America on these boards, I would reach out to them, and particularly their CEOs or chairman of the board or board members, and just ask questions, and then just begin to probe in terms of what's the transition, or how do you have any over time after you've developed a relationship. But I think those are often great places where you could meet a number of people and have deep relationships with, and it can actually help you then ask those questions, and they really have very good networks.
Great. I think we have time for just one more here quickly. This person wanted to know, was your experience as a female executive of color in Belgium different from your experience as a female executive of color here in the United States?
Absolutely, because not only was I of color and a woman, but I was also an American. So I mean, it just kept piling on, and so it's different. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know that I've ever not felt different. The question is how do you get the job done in a collegial way with others, so that you and everyone else is successful. And it's different, but absolutely, yes, it's very different there. And
go ahead, Pam.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's even tougher outside of the United States. It's tough as is this here. It's tougher in other parts of the world. They're not used to women at all, and they're not exposed to people of color. And they're not exposed to Americans. And depending on the era, you can be either really well liked or despised because of your affiliation with a particular country. So, it just has a bundle of challenges, but also opportunity.
Great. Well, I think that's the last question that we have time for. So, Bobby, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you, Pam.
Oh, thank you, Kelsey.
This Power Chat just flew by with you. You have been such an inspiration, and I still remember your speech at the Sandra Day O'Connor Board Excellence Award. It really, your authenticity and your empathy just shines through. So thank you so much. And I know our audience really appreciated the practical and invaluable insights and tips that you shared. So to our audience, thank you for joining us. I know you have come away with some really good advice. We hope you'll join us again next month for our webinar on Gateway to Corporate Board Service, Demystifying the Experience, on May 20th. Registration information for the May webinar will be included in the follow-up email from today's program and can also be found on directwomen.org. Please take a few moments to provide feedback in the very brief survey that will launch automatically at the end of the live program to help us improve DirectWomen's future virtual programs. I hope you've enjoyed this program as much as I enjoyed interviewing Pam Carter. So thank you so much, and stay safe.